There's a relationship between using analytics and just running your club in a professional manner. And if you run your club in a professional manner, you tend to be very successful. And you'll also have analytics in it as a bit. So there's a strong correlation there that might not always be a causation. But when we present data to players now, and this is true of all statistics, is what you compare to is the most important thing. So if you're trying to develop a player, you don't present to them how they're compared to other players in the team. What you do is you present to them how they did in that match compared to themselves. And so they're always fighting against themselves in some case, or developing against themselves. The term that we used a lot, and I still use, is self-organization. And now we're thinking about flocks of birds, so they're moving together. You see these dancing starlings in the evening light, and also fish of schools, moving together as one. And there you have it, they self-organize into a group that moves as one. And what we found when we were studying these animals is that they had very local rules of interaction. So with some fish, they would manage to make a fish school by just following one fish around. So each fish would just follow its nearest neighbor and avoid colliding with it, and they'd still move as a unified school. And the same thing with bird flocks. With bird flocks, they've discovered that they just look at their 7 nearest neighbors around them, and then they can make these brilliant patterns without ever crashing into each other. And so that's when you start to see the relationship with football, because you've got a formation, you want to have your sort of individual movement, but you've got a formation as well, and you want to stay in that formation, and you can't know where everybody is at any time. So you need some simple rules of interaction.
Hello coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Big one this week. We are joined by David Sumpter, soccer matician, data analytics expert, and co-founder of 12, who work with a number of top clubs around the world. We're going to talk about the success of data, and there are very few people more qualified to talk about it than David. Really excited about this one. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Please make sure you like, please make sure you subscribe, and an extra special thanks to Sports Lab 360 for teaming up with us on this one. Since 2016, they have been helping thousands of players and coaches to improve their soccer IQ and decision making on the pitch. It's one of the most easiest and the most affordable ways to get a little bit more out of your team from the decision making component. We'll have some more information at the halfway point, plus a special offer. Sports Lab 360, thanks very much. Please check them out. Links are below. Here is David. Enjoy. David, thank you for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Really excited to chat.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to hearing what we've got to talk about.
The last 3 months, data has been a hot topic in a lot of our podcasts, and it probably sounds as if we spend our time battering data, but and analytics. So to get you on and talk about the success of it and how to do it right, I mean, the research for this was really interesting. I picked up a copy of your book, Listen to the Ground Guru. You think about the game a lot differently. Can you talk a little bit about just the role of math in the game, you seeing either a passion for it or an opportunity that's maybe under-resourced, and how that journey's come about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from my personal journey, I didn't really come into this from, the passion from football angle. I have a sort of, a normal Englishman's passion for football, nothing exceptional, not like yourself and not like lots of people. Or that I didn't have that originally. I was a mathematician and I wanted to model things. And so for me, football was this amazing open challenge. So when I started writing the book, it was like, well, I've modeled lots of other things. I've modeled bird flocks, fish schools, ants, and so on. And I wanted this new challenge. And that's exactly what I saw in football. How could we use that mathematical angle to start understanding the game? And yeah, so it was really, I came at it from an academic point of view. But then what I've seen both in my own journey and also in like how other people have experienced this journey is such a change and such an interest in this level. I mean, I think one of the stories I like to tell about this was like one of the first people who came. So I live in Uppsala in Sweden. it's a pretty remote place for anyone in Europe or whatever. But then suddenly, like Lee Mooney, who was working for Manchester City at the time, he rings me up and says, like, can I come over and visit you? He said that Vincent Kompany's read your book. And and Vincent says that I should go over and speak to you about this. And so that was like, that was a real eye opener for me. And I had lots of clubs come over and visit me in Uppsala. And this was now we're talking like 2017, 2018. It was quite soon after the book came out. And then I realized, this is something to take seriously, that this could actually be, it's not just a sort of mathematical theoretical exercise. And it was then that I started working with Hammarby and started working through them. And that's when I really we'll probably get into this more, but that's when I got really close to working with the coaches. And that's, I think after that, when we could actually show there was a practical application on the ground and other people were doing the same, it's from there that it's really exploded in the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's so interesting. If my math teacher, when I was at GCSEs, could see me reading Mathematical Adventures right now, 30 years later, yeah, he'd have a giggle at it.
To be honest, more than the football and the impact that we've had on that was my original goal, it's to get someone like you getting a math book, reading it and understanding, well, I wish I'd paid a bit more attention, or maybe I could, look up a few things and learn the things. So it's not like a textbook at all. Is like a book which tells you about why you should be studying mathematics, and then you have to go away and do your homework after that. So you still have to do that part of it. But that was the original goal. So it's really happy, and it makes me really happy to see that result on in terms of lots and lots of different people suddenly reading mathematics books. Yeah, I mean, I get as often coaches will say to me that they've read Soccermatics as people who are data scientists. In fact, often it's the data scientists will say, well, I've seen your Soccermatics course online, or I've followed Friends of Tracking. They won't have read the book. But football coaches will often say to me, well, I've read your book. And so, you shouldn't sort of judge people by their professions. I think there's a wide variety of ways that people take in information.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I will admit it. Every 3 pages, I had to go away and put it down for 20 minutes and go for a walk. So you've come into the game and risen to prominence in this Soccermatics. It's like it seems to have, like, worlds have collided, where we're coming off the Moneyball revolution in baseball has obviously come into soccer, merged also with the like aggressive acceleration commercially in the game now that is just. It's just, you can feel it. Where do you think, like, majority of elite professional teams are using data, but a lot of people, maybe they're not saying it out loud, but they seem to be a little bit, I don't know, underwhelmed by it perhaps? Like, where do you see the current landscape, David, in this?
I mean, it's really interesting because you've got the one big success story really is Liverpool, and like no one can deny that, and that's very nice for me as a Liverpool fan, and they just really dominated that area. First with Ian Graham, then with Will Spearman, and now they've recruited Laurie Shaw as well, and Laurie Shaw and I are very good friends, so that's really nice to see. And so they've just recruited the best people, and they really led the way in that, and they've been leading the way in the research. And then you've got, of course, the Brighton and the Brentford stories, and they're doing some good stuff. And I think that they're definitely using analytics to some degree. I wouldn't say that what they do is like so advanced. They're just really well-run clubs, because like what's very difficult in all of this is that there's a relationship between using analytics and just running your club in a professional manner. And if you run your club in a professional manner, you tend to be very successful. And you'll also have analytics in it as a bit. So there's a strong correlation there that might not always be a causation, but certainly they're good examples in different ways. A Liverpool with very advanced statistics, and maybe Brighton and Brentford with simpler ideas, but very well implemented, are the good examples of when they've used it. And now after that, there isn't really that much, really great success stories that you can point to, everybody seems to be clambering over themselves to build analytics departments right now, and it's really, like, thinking back, it's quite incredible. It's like 10 years since I started writing the book, and it came out 2016, the first version. And it's now that everybody are like looking for these people and trying to build up analytics departments. And so they've certainly bought into it. And now it's really a case of trying to get those analytics departments to actually work and be effective and to start helping them win matches. But yeah, there's not that many great success stories to point to. So it still is kind of is, even myself, and I'm helping a lot of these clubs build up their analytics companies. So I should maybe be a little bit careful about what I'm saying, but it's still relatively unproven as a, actual unproven, as in we can point to this and we've got these types of results. And that's the type of thing that we can't really say much about. I think we've done a few things that we've certainly, with Hammarby, we've certainly seen a big increase in their performance, much better player trading. We've had great success with them on the women's side in particular. They won the League and Cup double last season, and we took them all the way from the lower division up to the top division. And a lot of the signings that we did, we used data. There, for example, in the women's game, you've got this amazing possibility because lots of people aren't using data. So it becomes much easier to find the best players. You could just it's very clear. You just look at the data and then you can sign the best players. So there we've been very successful. Then there's other examples. One of the ones that we talk about quite a lot recently is we worked with Burton Albion, who were tittering. I think it was a mission impossible to stop them becoming relegated. We helped with the recruitment of their coach. We helped with their opposition analysis, and we really went all in to do data analysis, which helped them on that journey to staying up. So there's those types of individual stories that are starting to come out of this whole thing. But at the higher level, which I think your question was more about at the Premier League, there isn't those great stories yet to tell about them.
I saw, funny enough, on YouTube, it popped up yesterday. There's a new podcast out, Libero, a few of the Rory Smith and Miguel Delaney. It's okay. And there's a clip that popped up, and it was the challenge with hiring or trying to basically headhunt a recruit specialist from a Brighton. Take that to Manchester United or take it anywhere, and that's model's not working. And I never thought of that before. Why do you think that you can't take, if I've built a department at Club X and I've shown pretty good competency and success in that over 3 to 5 years, why do you think I can't go and do that 50 miles down the road?
It's a really good question, and what I'm going to answer it with is a little bit like, so I've got to know Phil Giles recently, who works for Brentford, and he's done a few public things, so I don't think I'm saying too much about him. But like Phil Giles he has a PhD in statistics, right? And so that's brilliant. That means that they're an analytics type of club. But he's also just a very competent person who's good at managing everybody around him. And that's not always the case with the people who are put in charge of football clubs. And so, you see this now. There's a little bit, as we're speaking, there's a little bit of an exit of different people from Brentford, including the manager has gone somewhere else. And I don't want to downplay Thomas Frank's contribution. He seems like an excellent manager. But I think that's what, if you create that environment, and I visited Brentford a few months ago, and if you create that environment where everybody's doing a really good job together, then you can bring people in and you can afford to even, lose the top person to go somewhere else. And whether that top person will perform somewhere else, I think, is more uncertain than if the next person that you bring into that environment you've already created will succeed, because they're still talking and working within a very well structured environment. So, and even if somebody stole Phil Giles and ripped him off to somewhere else, he's already built up that environment there. And so everybody knows how it would happen if they're replaced, and I think that's what happens in lots of these cases, that they just sort of, the manager at Brentford seems like we'll steal that person, we'll bring them in. You know, we'll get that. They seem to be, the physical coach seems to be there, and we'll steal that person and bring them in. But that's not actually going to create the overall environment. And that's really what you see also in places like Liverpool, that it's the structure of the whole thing, and it's not necessarily down to the individuals. Again, Ian Graham, like, oh, he's a genius of like recruitment. He is a genius of recruitment, but you can also find another genius of recruitment if you've got a very good environment where data is going to be listened to, and you structure it in that way. And that's what I'd like to, I'd like to do a little bit of a shout out to Adrian Voinheiner, he's the technical director at Hammarby, and he came in 2 years ago, and that's exactly what he's focused on the entire time, is building up that type of environment and allowing that sort of success to blossom in every type of way. And I think that's what you have to do. It's not really about the individuals you hire. It's about building up a sort of culture around how those individuals work with each other, and then they become better themselves.
You mentioned there before about the kind of challenges at the highest level with just breaking through, the margins being so small. How much of that do you think is down to a lot of teams using the same data today? Does that cancel each other out a little bit?
Yes and no, because we still have to remember, like, worldwide, there's probably 80% of clubs aren't really using any data at all. I mean, yeah, if you think about like all of the clubs across the world, they're not really using it successfully in recruitment. And those 80% of clubs, they include half the clubs in the Premier League, and it's like, wow. So it's not for the clubs who are using data. They are cancelling themselves out to some degree, because they'll be focusing on the same players. So those 20% of the clubs in the world who are managing to use data, they will be looking at the same players, and then that becomes more difficult for them. And you see that definitely you can't just, it used to be the case like 10 years ago, you could just look at the expected goals so if you were a championship club 10 years ago, and you wanted to find a good player, you just look at the expected goals of some National League team. You'd look to see if they had any players who were under 20, if they were getting lots of time, and that would be the player you'd sign. That's all the data you would need to do that. You can't do that anymore, because other teams are managing to do that. So yes, now I've lost track a little bit about this, because there's both the people who are doing it, then they're losing the edge on just basic usage of data, and they're having to find more advanced methods. But there's still this massive gap where people aren't managing to do it, and they're still kind of stuck in this cycle of making recruitments based on the feelings of the technical staff or the scouts or whatever, like those types of things.
I went to a presentation, actually it was the StatsBomb conference. This is about 6-7 years ago, and I think it was Sarah Rudd did the presentation on data. I thought, it blew my mind that Arsenal had kind of taken their own, like bought their own department, or bought their own company almost. And then what they were doing then seemed to be that they were creating their own data at youth academy level and exactly. Using that. But I think that was 6 years ago, and I don't see that area really kicking on as much. Have you seen that with academy clubs, or do you see the value of that?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, Sarah Rudd was like a real pioneer in all of this. She was doing all of this stuff. I think that the Stats DNA was bought by Arsenal in 2011. So that's like, so it's amazing to say it's like 14 years ago now. So she was doing this stuff really, really early, and they did exactly that. They collected their own data before, Opta and StatsBomb or whatever. They started creating their own data sets, and they applied it to the academy and everything they were doing in scouting. And I think now most clubs in the Premier League anyway, their youth teams from 16 upwards will be covered by some form of data analysis. The problem is, not the problem, I mean, The problem for us the problem for us is analyzing these games is that you're also developing these players at the same time, right? And I think you've really got to take that into account. I'm not sure, like we do an analysis on PL2, for example, and it's really, really difficult to read anything into that. You've also got the issue that if they're playing PL2, maybe there's a better player who's playing in League One. How do you evaluate that? There's those types of things. So I think I would say that the data there should be used for developing the players, that like you're already talking to them about data, talking to them about the things that they did well in the matches, talking about whether they've made good pass selections. So those types of things should be the things that are being used and being focused on. And it probably isn't being done enough. It probably could be done more. I can't say that I know a club that is really focusing on training the kids using data from an early age. And I can see like so many benefits of that. When I worked directly with the players in Hammarby, and that I think was a great experience for them to actually think about the passing alternatives that they had, the choices and the decisions they've made, and just seeing those numbers. You have to be a little bit careful, because if you just start like saying it's how many expected goals you get, then you're really just going to be biasing towards the strikers, and you're just going to have them shooting all of the time. So you want to select the numbers which are going to be the most helpful for them, but actually helping them to start thinking about what their contribution is, what their role in the team is, and how they performed in particular matches compared to other matches. But when we present data to players now, and this is true of all statistics, is what you compare to is the most important thing. So if you're trying to develop a player, you don't present to them how they're compared to other players in the team. What you do is you present to them how they did in that match compared to themselves. And so they're always fighting against themselves in some case, or developing against themselves. And so you can see, we often show these distribution plots, and now I'm putting my hand across here, we have this line, and you have these dots which are your different matches. And if you're a long way over on the right hand side, you had a very good match. If you're a bit lower on that statistic, you're on the left hand side, and you can see, well, how did I do in that match? And that gives you an idea to compare to how you experienced the match, of how you performed. And so that then the coaches will sit down with the players and go through those and say, well, you did pretty well in this one, did you think about this? And then relate it to what actually happened in the game.
Coaches, does this sound familiar to you? You just finish up a session, and as you're walking off the pitch, you're thinking to yourself, I didn't get what I wanted out of that training session. Yes, you stuck to all your coaching points, but it didn't click for the players. If that sounds familiar, I would encourage you to check out our long-term partners, SportsLab 360. Their platform is made up of highly engaging interactive modules that you can assign to your players to help them improve their soccer, football IQ and decision making on the pitch. And in addition to the growth you'll see, you can also use the platform as a way to address tactical areas of development. Let's just say you're designing a session on counter pressing. You assign the SportsLab 360 module on that topic for your players to complete beforehand. Then by reviewing the quiz results, you can get a clear picture of what they grasped, what they didn't. Instead of just guessing, you walk into the training session with a focused plan of where the players need a little bit more support, and helps you maximize your time. And if you need any more inspiration, we have teamed up with SportsLab 360 Modern Soccer Coach to provide you with a variety of different training sessions, complete with coaching points and progressions, all ready for you to take into the training session. Head over now to sportslab360.com and use MSC20 for 20% off. What a great deal that is. sportslab360.com, 20% off using the code MSC20. A big thank you as always for their support, SportsLab 360. Back to David. It's the Hammarby experience. Also listening when you talked on the ground, Guru, sounded like a really collaborative experience and a collaborative working environment. And I think in a job interview, a lot of coaches would say that they're collaborative and open to all that, but I think the data person has become almost the school inspector of a football club, where you work, you see them coming.
That's a problem, right? I mean, that's I think you want to avoid that. And I avoided that when I worked with Hammarby. And I don't know, it's different. And now when we're working with 12, sometimes we're in the school inspector role, to be honest. Sometimes it's the director of football who brings us in and says, like, we need to sort of check the manager's really performing, and with this new manager be better, those types of things. And then you have to take that role very seriously. But in the example I just gave, where you're trying to help a coach maybe work with younger players to develop them, then it's completely different. You choose a different thing that you want to compare against, and you're really working together to develop the player as a whole. And so I don't want to say that, that numbers are never this kind of harsh decider of those types of things. Like in fact, even at Hammarby, we worked together with, I worked very well together with Stefan Billborn. And I wouldn't say, it's interesting, that collaboration. So it was more that he was just sort of open to various types of things, and he sort of like tolerated me and let me be around. He was just like nice to me. I think he thought I was a bit daft, right? But he thought, okay, you can hang around. And then over time there was more and more respect, and then I could do more and more things. But then in the end of the day, there was also in the end of the collaboration, we had a very successful season. Then a couple of seasons later, he had a less successful season, and he won the Swedish Cup. But there was still a decision at that point to fire him. And that wasn't necessarily a data-driven decision, but the data was consistent with that decision. And somebody has to write a report saying, you've said you'll deliver this type of style of play. This is what the style of play actually looks like. Yes, we won the cup. That's great. But, that wasn't actually what you said you'd deliver. And now it's time for somebody else to take on that role and take on that challenge. So you just have to be able to do all of those roles as a data scientist, and be honest and open about the challenges and what you're trying to bring there.
Yeah, like I see the role of data kind of checking that intention and style from a technical director ownership. I just wonder if we were a little bit too idealistic from an ownership or point of view, where you think everyone wants this style today, and you'd struggle to find 5 teams in the world who consistently produce it.
Yeah, that's another interesting issue about the style of play. We always when we work with clubs, even from the Premier League, who they don't necessarily have a style of play. They always, but we always do say that you should start off by defining something about your style of play or what you want to achieve as a team and as a club. So I think that that's kind of important, that there's a sort of mission statement. But in the end, it is just like good football players playing good football, which sort of wins matches, to be honest. So it's more like I think it more comes down to what I was saying about, good organization around a club is not necessarily like that style thing is not necessarily the sort of deep tactical analysis that you might like to think about analyzing. Manchester City having this particular style of play is more about a consistency about how you do things and what you want to achieve. So, for example, at Hammarby, we don't talk so much about style of play, but what we talk about is the strengths of Hammarby. And Hammarby is an environment where everybody can get better. So that's basically what Adrian says. This is an environment where everybody can get better. And that is from like the data analysis people, from the players to the coaching staff. We want to provide that. And then it goes very well together with and this is a luxury because it goes together with the ethos of the fans. Now, Hammarby fans have not been blessed until recently with a great deal of success on the football pitch. And it's only recently that success has come. And so what they do is they celebrate the individuals who play for the team, and they celebrate their spirit, and they always sing no matter if we're winning or losing. And so you can take that, and that lifts up. So the fans become a relationship, which then build into the ethos of the club. And so it's not like a detail. And then it also comes to the style of play, because what the fans do not want to see is like long balls being kicked up the pitch. They don't want to see long throw-ins. They in fact boo long throw-ins. So that, so we have to adjust to that, because from an analytics point of view, always do a long throw-in. There's no doubt about it. Analytics says do long throw-ins that scores goals, but you have to find an alternative to doing those long throw-ins. So we can, for example, do a short throw-in and then a cross into the box, which is pretty much the same effect as doing a long throw-in. So those types of feeling about the club then still make a difference to the kind of football that they expect to see on a Sunday in Sweden. And though that's how it fits together, it's not like a detailed document about exactly how we play in every type of situation. It's that sort of feeling then translating into ideas, which are then measurable. I hope I'm not just going on a little bit here, because then what we come back to and what we do now, we've put in place a system in Hammarby where every year I go to a theatre in south of Stockholm, where Hammarby is based, and all the fans are welcome to come to this theatre, and I do a presentation about the statistics of how we've measured the team over the last year. And then Adrian answers questions about, like, why we've done this decision and we've done that decision. And so then there's a feedback with the fans. So they want to see a lot of passes in the final third. We have that. It's on the web page. So every week they can check on the web page, how was it in the previous match? They can see how it's changing over time. And then they can come once a year and they can interrogate us if we've actually lived up to what we promised, how we promised to play, and why we haven't lived up to that, or why we, where we're going with those types of things.
Yeah, this is great, because you said on the Ground Guru podcast, you talked about the blog you wrote as well. And
this is really difficult here now. You've listened to this podcast much more recently than I remember speaking about it.
I had to stop every 2 minutes when I was walking to write down another question. This here piece, all right, I love that. I didn't know about the theatre piece. I love that. I think that's amazing. But if I know at least 20 coaches personally, and I'm guessing that I have a large sample size who would absolutely be against, because they would think that I am not standing in front of 300 people baying for blood, nor am I giving them every week our data. Like, so my question, is that something that's easier in the Swedish culture? You guys are open, or do you think that would work anywhere?
There's two aspects to it. The first one is, notice they send me to do it, right? It's not the coach that's doing it, they send me. So they just, there's a bit like related to my relationship between Stefan Billborn and myself. They just send the idiot. They're like, there's the academic, right? He's just gonna. So it's a bit of entertainment, right? And they've had a couple of beers most of the time here, so it's like, so it's that. So definitely there's that. That's one part of it. Plus, it is in the culture, actually. So we're 51% clubs in Sweden. And so the fans own 51% of the club. So they have the right to know what's going on. And with that right comes a responsibility. So there are some tough questions, but it's probably nicer than most of the things that you hear shouted at the players on a Saturday afternoon, to be honest. So, it's a bit in the culture. It's a combination of both things. It's a bit in the culture, and it's a bit how we've set it up, where because it's me that's representing it, it's I'm not really entirely responsible for that. The tougher job then lies with the technical director, Adrian, and also the director, Mikael. They have to, they really have to deal with those really tougher side of things.
I want to get into the rules of motion, because I think this is fascinating. You talked again in that interview about some of the work you were doing. That was a few years ago. You talked about the rules of motion with birds, and a lot of coaches. I didn't really know the insights of it, so I say a lot of coaches have probably heard of it. I hadn't. Can you talk about that work and again how the birds have any relevance to football tactics?
It's funny because to me, when I started writing the book and everything, like to me, it was just obvious immediately that birds were the most relevant species for football. But obviously, it seems a bit extreme. But I mean, the term that we used a lot, and I still use, is self-organization. So what birds do when you and now we're thinking about flocks of birds, so they're moving together. You see these dancing starlings in the evening light, and also fish of schools, moving together as one. And there you have it. They self-organize into a group that moves as one. And what we found when we were studying these animals is that they had very local rules of interaction. So what one bird would do, in fact, with some fish, they would manage to make a fish school by just following one fish around. So each fish would just follow its nearest neighbor and avoid colliding with it, and they'd still move as a unified school. And the same thing with bird flocks. With bird flocks, they've discovered that they just look at their 7 nearest neighbors around them, and then they can make these brilliant patterns without ever crashing into each other. And so that's when you start to see the relationship with football, because you've got a formation, you want to have your sort of individual movement, but you've got a formation as well, and you want to stay in that formation, and you can't know where everybody is at any time. So you need some simple rules of interaction in order to hold those kind of shapes and build those types of structures. And that really is where this whole idea from the birds can be transformed over to football, that you can give players very simple rules about what they should do when they lose the ball, for example, how they should immediately react, where they should fall back to, into a defensive position. You can think of a more stable, when you're thinking about defending your own box area, for example, in a much compacted defense. You can't look at where every one of your teammates is at, plus look where the ball is. So you can give simple rules for maybe a distance between the players in front of you, player left and right, also which lanes you should be in. And so if you give each individual player the rules that they should follow, roughly, you don't want to take away all of their kind of intuition and so on, but the rules that they should follow, then you'll be able to self-organize your defensive structures in particular into much more effective shapes.
Unbelievable. Out of possession, I was listening to this and I was thinking, this is genius. Out of possession, I get it. But then as you went, you said you were working, I think it was Ajax you were working at that time, and you were doing some modeling around rules of motion with decision making and cues in possession. How difficult is that, or complex is that?
That's in possession is easier to talk to the players about. So what we were doing at that point, and what we still do, is that, like, if you think about a counter-attack where you've got 4 players running forward, or maybe 4 different passing options. So what you can do is you can look to see how the space in front, so you've got a player with the ball, and then you've got maybe 4 other players that they could possibly pass to. You can look to see how the spaces are being opened up by those players. You can also assess the value of those spaces. If it's more central, it's more valuable because you're more likely to score from it. And so you can create an idea about how space is being opened up. And that's really what you're trying to do, is those 4 players together, you want to open up your individual space. And if you all open up your individual space, then there becomes lots of passing alternatives, and then it becomes much more difficult to defend. And so that's a simple example of a self-organized pattern. Open up space for yourself in a counterattack, and then you'll open up opportunities for the player who's got the ball to pass, making it much more difficult for the defending players to maintain their structure. They're maintaining their rules, and you're kind of opening up space within their rules. So that's one example. I mean, the other example came right from the start of when I looked at this with Tiki Taka and Barcelona at the time, and that was just incredible, because again, they would just always just be moving into space. They would be looking for a space. And when they weren't moving into space, this is another kind of these simple rules. You do a run into an area you don't want to go. You see Messi does this all the time. Runs towards an area he doesn't want to go, and then he takes the run into the area he wants to go. And that's one of those simple self-organized rules that allows you to be more effective in attack.
Staying on Barcelona, then Xavi was you had some relationship with him and the data side of it. I mean, again, this fascinated me. How was he using data alongside that kind of Barcelona methodology?
Yeah, I think that there was a kind of, at that time, because I worked together, we did this Friends of Tracking thing, Javier Fernandez, and we at that time they had a lot of sort of academic studies going on, but they weren't allowed near the first team. So I've been down there a couple of times, and it's not as if you can just, I couldn't just like go up to Messi in the same way as I could go up to the Hammarby players and go, look, is this, what were you thinking when you moved here, or moved that? So they did a lot of kind of academic studies within the innovation hub and things like that. But I think he was slightly frustrated at that time that he didn't always get to have an impact on the first team. And I suppose, it's understandable when you've got those players there, when you're winning the Champions League, you don't quite need all of this data input. But I think that's changed, that's changed with a lot of the clubs. I don't know that it's necessarily changed to what degree it's changed at Barcelona, but Javi Fernandez now has a new role at Chelsea, and you can see how the people who are doing the sort of more mathy, machine learning type people and be giving the more and more senior roles to actually make decisions and influence things within the clubs. And it's quite amazing to see. We started this Friends of Tracking thing. It was myself, Javier Fernandez, Suds, Laurie, Pascal Bauer as well. We also worked with Alex Thomas, who was at the English FA. We started up doing those things, and then at that time we were kind of in more technical roles, and now these guys are leading roles in Premier League clubs. Suds has just really proven the worth of this at Atalanta. That was very much down to a lot of scouting work done by him. So you're starting to see these people who were just seen as these kind of academic outsiders being given highly responsible roles within leading Premier League clubs.
When they're in those roles, and you're obviously at 12 doing something quite similar, when you're looking at a coach, again, I'm guessing there's going to be quite a few coaches driving to this or working out to this and thinking, I would love to get on the radar for David to get me on. I bet you I profile as a data friend. Like, I mean, what type of things do you have to have alongside? Is it a refined playing style? Is it all the numbers, or like how deep does this go? We had Tim Creech was on here about 18 months ago and talked about dealing with media and the relationships with players, and it can go in a lot of different places. I mean, when you're profiling a coach, what are some things that?
I mean, I can tell you, there's sort of two answers to that. I mean, the first answer is because we built a coach recruitment app recently, which we've worked together with several clubs, helping them recruit coaches. And when August, who built it, one of our data scientists, when he presented it, he asked everyone in the team like what they thought were the most important things for recruiting a coach. And we went around the room and we all listed what we thought, and we were all data scientists, and not one person said anything to do with data.
Wow.
It didn't even come into our heads that we needed to say something that was measurable in a thing. I mean, the skill I see is like always being cool in those types of situations. So like I just see the pressure that coaches are under, exactly as you say, with the media, and then people just talking to them all the time, phoning them, texting them all the time, and then just to be able to like go through each of those things, probably 18 hours a day. You've also got your family life to deal with and all of that stuff, to actually be able to keep on top of all of those things. And there's no way of measuring that, or you can't measure whether somebody's managing to do that well with data, because it's just an incredibly tough job managing any team. I think it's really, really intense with all of these different voices. And so I said that for me, that was the one that I said to August was the biggest thing. It's just always having a cool head with all of these different voices talking to you all the time. And so that's the non-technical answer. I mean, the technical answer is how we've solved this problem is really just to look at the effect that the coaches have had going into a team. So when we did this at Hammarby, what we did is we first sat down and said, well, as I said before, we want to develop players. We want to be an environment where everyone gets better, right? And so what we did is we looked at the style of play of teams where players were actually getting better. So you could look at Salzburg, for example, who were really leading at that time in having this really young squad who were improving, and then they'd sell on to the next thing. And you could look to see, well, what discerned their style of play. And it was a lot of pressing. It was a lot of very kind of fast moving football. And then we said, well, okay, so which coaches, when they've taken over a club, start to get their team to play more in that type of style of football, irrespective of if they had young players or old players in the squad. So not just who's developed younger players before, but who's actually changed their style to be more in line with what we would like to play if we want to develop young players. And then we could identify coaches who fitted into that role. So we'd have this time series basically of the team before they took over, then they took over, and then you'd see if that line went up or down, and you could see if they actually impacted some kind of change during their time.
So interesting. I was watching Damien Duff is coaching an Irish team, Shelbourne, and up until the weekend, and there were Champions League campaign about to start, and he just walked away. And but it was someone who was driving everything at a level, and you could see it eating away at him. So I wonder, again, the theory of having a coach who ticks all the boxes from a football perspective. Like, surely there's also a trade-off that you have from, they are going to be immersed in the job, that they probably will be emotionally out of sync in some moments with the media, and how do you have that conversation with an owner?
I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, it's a really difficult job, and I think one way I can give an example of one way in which we support coaches. So one project we did together with a Premier League team, and I'm not going to mention the manager, but what we could do is we delivered a match report within a minute of the match finishing. And what we did is we had what went well. So it was and the match report was longer, but on the first page it had like what went well, what went badly. And so this was really useful to him, because then when he went out to talk to the press, like, it's got really emotional during the game and everything's happened, but he could just look at that picture while he's walking down the tunnel, goes off to do the press conference, and also he's got to speak to the players as well. So before he does those two things, he knows statistically what went well and what went badly. And then he has like that talking point in his head, and it's just to go over those points with the press, no matter what the kind of emotional thing is, and then to talk to the players and say, these are the key takeaways. We're going to talk more about this tomorrow, of course, but this is what went well and what went badly. And so that's the type of way that where data can really support in those very tough situations. And I think that's going back to your question about like always being judged by it. There's no judgment there at all. It's really just a support tool for making you a better coach and allowing you to reduce the type of pressure that you're under. You can just automatically kind of robot-like, without thinking too much about it, just say, well, this is what the game looked like. This was what we were worse. This is where we were better, and go through those points.
I love that. What you also said in that interview, it sounds like I'm just ripping this interview off, but I had so many follow-ups.
It's nice with an update.
You talked about research projects, and again, I said before we started recording, I really like the fact that you talked about research so much, because it shows. I think you even referenced the bird study about, had you just gone in and said something about birds without knowing it, it lacks the context, etc. But you said that it would I think $1 million or £1 million upwards would be of a research project. Which today, it seems with financial fair play, and it seems like, I don't know, I don't understand a lot of these models, again, showing my naivety towards numbers. I can't understand how much money these companies are making, and they're paying analysts $30K for a full-time analyst. They're not willing, a lot of them aren't willing to build departments with long-term strategic growth. Yeah. Is that hard today, or am I being a bit too critical on that?
I think it's changed. It has changed since I gave that interview. I mean, I would say that all of the big teams now have gone through that journey. Like the big Premier League teams, they've all decided to spend £1 million a year on this. Actually, I think they've all done that. And so that's very nice for the data scientists. You know, I was talking about Xavier being hired and all of those types of things. So they've all made that decision now. So that really is nice to give an update. I can't remember when I did that interview like 2 years ago, because that's you know, Liverpool made the decision early, but now they've all made that. Whether they're just paying, whether they're doing it wisely or not, that's another question. But they've made that decision, and we also, in a sense, also since then, we made that decision as well as the company 12. So before when I was talking about this, we did more consultancy type of work, and we worked together. And as you say, we never really, you know, even when you're working with the Premier League clubs, you never really managed to get a big fee out of them to do it. And I was very easy to get for a cheap fee because I think it's so much fun, you know. So there was no there's no sort of money-making business potential for it. But then we made the decision a year and a half ago to start building a platform which puts together all of our knowledge. And so that's what we've done with this 12 earpiece idea, that we can deliver data science to everybody. And so I'm not sure we spend $1 million yet. I'd have to ask the finances of this project. I hope we haven't spent $1 million. But you know, what we're doing is building a platform which any club can use. You know, I mentioned earlier that 80% of clubs don't really have any data analysis at all. And so our idea is to build a Premier League standard and data platform which anybody can basically access and use and get information for. And what the one extreme we have of that is we have this WhatsApp chat now. So you can basically just type in the name of any player you're interested in, and it will give you a short visual and text description of that player, how he's performing, how he's done that season, and those types of things that we can deliver now. You know, you mentioned this like before, everybody's got the data, and that's sort of what we want to do. We want to give everybody access to not the state of the art, but at a 90% level. And so there is a kind of very, very good access to that data thing, that data level. So yeah, I would say that overall, those kind of investments have started to happen, and not just in the Premier League, but in kind of platforms that can be then delivered to other teams.
Fantastic. Last couple for you. You also, or no, the game is also going through a little bit of an evolution now with the director of football role, and you've referenced it a few times, technical directors that you're working with. A lot of coaches that are now starting to, maybe they've been coaching a while and they're looking to evolve and go into a more leadership role. And what do you think are some, because again, there's a lot of courses that are now offered, and some people are thinking, listen, I got to go and get a data course, or I got to go and get like, what do you think in football today, in working with these technical directors and directors of football, what do you think are some of the skills that they need to have in that job?
It's funny you asked that, because we've just put a load of courses on our web page for exactly this. We thought we've been through, you know, now I feel like I'll just be selling a load of courses to you, but we actually went through all the needs at the different levels, and we decided to make courses for all of those types of levels. So if you're just starting, so if you're more at the analyst scout level and you want to get into this stuff, we made a Power BI course. So you use Power BI and just analyzing data and getting a feeling for it. Then we've got a Python course if you want to, like, you know, analyze Python. I feel I should say there's other Python courses out there as well. You know, there's a variety of Python, so you can actually start getting going with the programming. But then specifically to sporting directors, we're going to run a course because we brought in Dominic Jordan, who was working as head of data at Manchester United, and he came and is working for us now. And so he's going to have a course in January next year, covering exactly everything that you need to know as a director of football. And that's really going to be case study driven. So taking examples like the Brighton example, the Liverpool example, the Burton Albion example I mentioned earlier, you know, like these little sort of case studies. What is it we did, and how can you solve those problems using data? And so I think if you do it case study driven, you get a really good idea. And then just to continue the course thing, we also have, so I've run this Soccermatics Pro course, which is really, that's the course you want to do if you want to work in the data science department at one of these clubs, either a big club or a smaller club. And then we've even done at the absolute most advanced, Pega Rahimiani, she's a researcher I work with a lot, and she's going to do a course at the most advanced level in deep learning and AI. So everything from like just getting going with data through the data, through the directors of football, all the way up to like doing this advanced stuff in deep learning and AI. I think that all of those things are needed, and there's more and more availability of those types of courses.
Okay, last for you, big question, last one. What area is AI going to hit the most in the next 5 years?
Wow. I think, yeah, what's it going to, I mean, right, if I was to make a prediction, I mean, it's difficult there because, or the thing I would say is like the language model stuff that we're doing now, where you can actually get a language report, a language given report on a player, that is really going to be big coming over the next 5 years. And I think that that's really what we're focusing on, so that you can interact. So you don't need to have this data scientist with you all the time. That you're interacting directly by typing in messages or even speaking in messages, and you're getting those messages back to you. So that's definitely going to be a very big thing. But if I was like to speculate even further into the future, I think one of the interesting things will be the really big computer vision breakthrough, because just now you have some companies who provide tracking data of the teams, but it's quite expensive to acquire all of that tracking data. But I think that there will be a breakthrough similar to the language modeling breakthrough, where it becomes easy to do that tracking. And so anybody in the world can track their match. You know, my son, he plays Division 6 in Sweden, and they've got the cameras up there, and soon he'll be able to get a like report on how he played, how the other players in his team played, very quickly through these types of AI methods. And that will just make a massive difference, I think, in grassroots football.
Brilliant. Well, hey, what a way to finish. You've given us something else to blow our minds here. David, well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been amazing.
No, well, thank you very much.